What's up guys, my name's Adam and today I'm going to be sharing with you something that I'm really passionate about. I'm going to be showing you how you can improve your SolidWorks surfacing ability in 4 simple stages. We're going to take a look at how surfacing can help improve your workflow and gain better control over the details that you're adding within SolidWorks. Let's hop into the video. In the first step, we're going to be looking at how to add a simple recess using only 3 surface commands. Here I have a model of an electric toothbrush, and so far all the features have been created using solid modeling. I now want to use surface modeling to create details on the front on this non-planar surface. It basically means I can't sketch on it and use solid modeling features with ease. I mean, I could use a wrap, but it won't give us as much control as surfacing does. So we're going to come up first and turn on the surfacing toolbar, and we can do that by right clicking on any of the tabs on the command manager and selecting surfaces. We can also turn on the surfaces toolbar to give us a more compact version by right clicking up here on the command manager and coming down to surfaces. And this will give us something we can toggle on any of the toolbars in SolidWorks. I'm going to go ahead and close this down though, because this is probably the best way to start off with surfaces because it gives you the names of all the commands. Right, we're going to start on the front plane and we're going to start by sketching the geometry that we want to project onto the surface. In this instance, I'm going to use a simple slot command. We could use any shape that we wanted on the front, in theory, to project onto the surface though. So if you wanted a more rectangular shape, or if you wanted to use splines to draw your shape on, that's also perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and add some dimensions because it's good practice to do so that when we're rebuilding the model it doesn't all collapse at a later stage or your sketch geometry doesn't jump about. So go ahead and add in some basic dimensions and then I'll hop out of that sketch. Now I want to use a tool called split line, and we can access it up here, but I prefer to come and turn on the curves toolbar, so we can go ahead and dock that over there and then access the split line tool over here. What split line does is essentially it allows us to select a sketch from the graphics window, like so, and a face to project it onto. We can also control the direction of projection. So by default it will be a dual direction projection, but to make it single direction we can use these options here, and I want to project it onto the front, so I'm going to click the reverse direction. Now this will give us a split line here on the surface, and it will basically break up the surfaces for us. Using this, I can now copy this surface to create some surface geometry, because at the moment we only have 2 solid bodies and we don't have any surface geometries. So I am going to use the offset surface tool. And usually you'd set an offset with this tool, but we can also use it just to copy a surface. So notice how it basically offsets the surface geometry whilst retaining the same curvature as the surface by a specified distance. I can come up here and change that to 0 mil, and that will give us a perfect copy of the surface. And notice the name of the tool also changes to copy surface when we do this. So now we've actually got a surface bodies folder. And let's take a closer look at that surface, and I'll explain exactly what a surface is in relation to a solid body. So we can use the tab key on the keyboard and the shift tab key to hide and show bodies. This is another tip, so I can use the tab key to hide that body, and then the shift tab key to bring them back when we want to. So shift tab key to bring it back. Surface is basically a piece of geometry with 0 thickness. So in real life it wouldn't actually exist because everything has some kind of thickness, but the goal of surface modeling is to essentially create a solid volume out of all these wafer thin surfaces. And we're going to be exploring how to do that a bit more. In this case, we're simply going to use this surface to make a cut into this solid body. So come ahead up here and use the thickened cut command. This allows us to select the surface and to cut by specified distance into it. So we could choose mid-plane here and we could cut in both directions, but in this case we have nothing on the outside, so we just want to cut inside. And select the check mark on that. And that's awesome. We have a simple shaped recess, and we could go ahead and add fillets or chamfers for aesthetic reasons. But that's step one, and you can see how very quickly, in 3 steps, you can create a recess of any shape that you desire on a non-planar surface. So, now that we have the recess slot geometry, we can think about adding a button that will sit in this slot and that will match the curvature of this front face. And whilst we want to add a button in here, we want it to be a separate part, or a separate body in this part file, should I say. In order to do that, it's actually pretty simple, and we can just use the rollback bar. And if you haven't used the rollback bar before, all it does is it suppresses temporarily all the features beneath it and takes our model back to the last command that we did, so this surface offset. I'm going to go ahead and copy this surface offset and just do another one. So this will give us 2 of the same of this surface here, and you'll see why we do this in a minute. When we roll forward again, we have the cut recess and we have this surface. And using this surface, we can actually just do the exact opposite of the cut thicken, which is a thicken. And this will take this surface and just thicken it perpendicular to it. And if this checkbox here, merge result, is ticked, we want to make sure it's unticked, because if merge result is on, basically what it will do is it will merge this body with the existing body beneath it, and so we won't have 2 separate bodies, which is not what we want. So make sure this is unchecked, and then we can go ahead and exit out of that, and we'll now have 2 bodies. In order to add some definition between the 2, however, it is good to use a fillet. And this will also be greatly beneficial if you're using rendering software like Visualize or Keyshot afterwards, because it will help give that little bit of tolerance and part line definition that there would be in real life. So that's pretty good. In the next step, I'll be showing you how you can gain a little bit more control over the direction of the cut or the profile of the top of this button. Say you wanted it to jut out a little bit. I'll be showing you how to do that in the next step. So now we're going to take a look at how you can make the button raised instead of recessed, or in this case level with the surface. I'm just going to start off by deleting the fillets and the thickens to take us back to the state where this was just a surface and a recess. Okay, so if I want to create a raised surface, I know I'm going to need to create a surface that's actually offset by a distance from this one. So I'm going to start off by doing that. I'm going to come up here to offset surface, select this surface and set a distance, and this might be something even as small as 1.5 mil. Now when I sketch onto this, I'm planning on simply doing a offset of this shape, but you could in theory sketch any shape onto here and then do a surface loft or a boundary surface from this edge to that shape. And I'd suggest a good step first is to take this and to untrim this sheet. So we can use this command called untrim surface here, and what this does is it takes this surface and it basically extends all its edges out to how it would imagine it to be before it is either split or trimmed. So we can use that. And then similar to before, I'm going to come onto the front plane, sketch, normal to, and I'm going to create another shape. It will also help if we go ahead and just show this original slot that we drew. I'm just going to take this, offset that, and reverse the direction. And then I can split line that onto this surface here. Then we have this part of the surface that we don't actually need anymore. And if we try to just click on it and delete it, it would actually ask us, do we want to delete the split line feature? And that's not what we want to do. So we can use this tool called delete face. And in this instance, all we need is the delete option. And this will just take away this excess part of material. So you can now see that we've got this surface here. And if I hide this solid body for a second, you can see that it's an offset at a distance of 1.5 mil, and it's also offset around the edge. Like I said before, you could have any shape here. You could have a circle or a slightly smaller slot or a shape constructed with a spline, and you could do a boundary between the two. So I'm going to be showing you now how we can do a boundary surface. But before you create a boundary surface, I still want there to be some thickness to the back of this button so that it's able to sit inside the main body of the toothbrush and perhaps be fixed in place. In order to do that, we have these surfaces of the solid body already, so we can just go ahead and copy them and then use that later together when we create our enclosed solid from a bunch of surfaces. So if we go ahead up to offset surface and select 0 mil, and then for our selections, we want to go ahead and select all these inside surfaces, like so. Now that we have these, we can hide the solid body and see what we've achieved is basically replicating all these surfaces. We will in fact no longer need this surface, so I can actually just click on this surface up here and select delete/keep body, and this will take us into this command and delete this surface. In order to create the boundary like we talked about, we're going to first need to create some guide curves. So I'm selecting the right plane because it runs right through the middle of this, and I'm going to come normal to using the view cube. I'm going to then go ahead and create two sets of guide curve lines, but I also want to make sure with these that they're not just floating around in space. Like this one, they're either coincident or pierced to the vertices as such, like that. So I'm going to go ahead and pierce these in. Excellent. Okay, so I can now step out of that, and then I want to create two on the side here. So I've set up a shortcut for planes with key P, and that's something I can show you how to do in another video, or you can come up to reference geometry and just create a plane. I'm going to use the midpoint here. I'm going to use this one as well. This one's been a little bit awkward to select. There it is. And you know, for a plane input, we need either 3 points, 2 lines, or 1 surface. So in this case, we need 3 points. That's pretty much exactly what we want. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to sketch on plane 1. And then as before, I can just sketch in my lines. And it's worth doing this because it just improves the surface quality and makes the surface a little bit more consistent how we want it when we do the boundary surface. So pierce and pierce. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to go into boundary surface tool. The boundary surface is pretty similar to the solid boundary, and if you haven't used that, pretty similar to the loft as well. Direction 1 is essentially where we pick our profiles. So we're going to go from this edge here, and we want to use the selection manager to ensure we get a loop, to this edge here, So again, right click Selection Manager, make sure the loop command is checked, and this is what we get. Then we just want to go ahead and use direction 2 to put in what are essentially our guide curves. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. There it is. You can see that is pretty good to what we want. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and check that. And that's pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Now this is still a surface. If I hid one of these surfaces, you'd see there's no solid volume. And if we did a cross section down the middle, you can see that, yeah, there's essentially no solid volume. So we now need to turn this into a solid. So I'm just going to go ahead and show this surface offset that we did and hide that body. This is the point now where we've constructed all our own surfaces, and we can use the knit surface command, box select all of these, and you can see that there are some gaps here. So just check all these boxes to knit all the gaps together, and that will basically eliminate all the gaps. And then we can click create solid. And this knit surface is this tool that you're going to use time and time again in surfacing to create a solid from the surfaces. So now we have a solid, and you can see that because the surface body folder has disappeared and we've got an extra solid body. So if we show this, we now have something like that. And that's pretty cool. And again, I'd say add a little bit of part line definition using the fillet tool. So add in, of course, and we can't fillet multiple bodies, so that's something you'll get used to as well. We have to do multiple fillet features for multiple bodies, and that's pretty cool. So we now have that raised surface, and that's a little bit of an extreme raise, but we can go ahead and modify that if we wanted to. So in the final part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can utilize even more features to gain that extra little bit of control when you're looking to create something like a concave button, say that we could put on the surface here. To start off again, we're going to make sure that we've shown this underlying sketch, and that came from my split line, my original split line, and then hop over onto the front plane, come normal to, and start your sketch. Okay, so the reason we show this underlying sketch is because it gives us a center point here. So when we draw a circle, we can be sure that this circle is in fact concentric to that arc. I am going to make that 9mm, that dimension. Okay. Then we want to start thinking about split lining that potentially onto there. So I'm going to use the split line tool again, select that face, single direction, reverse direction, and check that. That's good. So again, I'm going to want to offset, and remember how when we wanted to add thickness to the part, but also add an offset, we needed to offset this twice. So at 0mm, I'm going to offset once, and I can actually press the enter key and bring up the same command that I literally just used. So enter key, and complete that operation again. Okay, so with one of these, I'm going to create a thickened cut of 1mm, and that's going to go into this body here. So thickened cut and my surface on top. I'm then going to offset this surface by distance this time, so 1mm, and I'm going to start another sketch on the front plane. Now I'm going to start this sketch with the intention of projecting it onto this second surface. So again, we've got the underlying sketch, which we can snap our circle to. We can, and we might want to here, before we do that, come in and show that sketch as well, so we can dimension between the two. And maybe a 1mm offset will be suitable in this instance. So instead of using a split line in this instance, we can also use a tool called Trim Surface. This utilises, on standard mode, utilises a trim tool, which is usually a sketch, and it will allow us to remove surface selection. So in this case, we want to remove this outside part. We want to split all, and that will remove that. Great. So we now have this surface hovering over the top here, and like before, we want to come in and copy these surfaces. So I'm going to come into offset surface 1, 2, change the offset distance to 0 mil, hit enter on the keyboard. Okay, so now we've got that. That is what I was looking to do. I'm going to come in and do another boundary surface to give us a nice little chamfer between the two, 1 and 2. And I should actually put in guide curves, but because that will take a little longer for the time being, I'm just going to show you without guide curves instead. So that's looking pretty straight. Awesome. Okay, so we now have like the outside surfaces of our button, but you'll notice I said we wanted this to be concave, and at the moment this surface actually follows the top surface, so I can just use Shift and Shift Tab to hide that. So Tab to hide that and Tab to hide that, and I'm going to come in and construct my own geometry that we can actually use to produce this surface. So I'm going to start on the right plane because I know that the right plane cuts that in half. I'm just going to head over and hide those sketches as well for clarity. So sketch on the right plane. Now in order to create this perfect concave aspect, we're going to use a 3-point arc. So come in and just pierce your 3-point arc to the outside of the circle, and also I would add a point to the center of the 3-point arc, because this will allow us to snap the other 3-point arc on when we come to it. And of course I would always recommend fully defining your sketches. I'm going to make that 0.8 instead. Great. Now in order to create another 3-point arc, I need to actually create a plane, because there's no plane that intersects my button horizontally at the moment. So I've got my plane set up on a shortcut key as we discussed earlier, but you can always get a reference geometry in plane as well if you need. So I'm going to use this point, and as I'm using a point I also need a stronger reference like the top plane. So there's going to be parallel to the top plane, intersect that point. That'll be perfectly halfway through there. I'll come onto this plane that I've just created, and I'm going to create another 3-point arc sketch. Now in a moment we're going to snap that through the middle of that. We want that to be coincident with the point that we created, and that was why we created the point. So this will fully define this as well when we pierce that, and we can finally pierce that into there. Beautiful. So now we've got our, this is essentially what we want it to look like. We want these to be filled in, these patches here, and we can do this pretty simply actually. So we can use a tool called Swept Surface, and you might have not used it in this way before, but when we're creating surface geometry we don't need a closed profile for the sweep. So as our profile I'm going to select this, and as our path I'm going to select that, and you'll notice how this whole globe thing shows up. We basically want to make sure that it's bidirectional, and we also want to make sure that it follows the path. If we keep normal constant, it will mean that we'll have to trim off some of this. So we actually really want to follow the path in this case. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've got that, we know that we're going to need to trim it. In order to trim it, however, we need there to be a little bit more definition for the trimming tool. And in order to do that, we're going to need to extend. We know we need to extend this surface. So just extend it by 1 mil or however much you need, so that there's a clear and obvious overlap. Then in one simple trim command, we can use the mutual trim, and this simply allows us to select multiple surfaces as the trim tools, and then to trim off multiple sections as well. So it's really useful. If you haven't explored that and you've only explored the standard trim, see, this pretty much does what the standard trim does in 5 operations in about 1 operation. But it's not the right tool to use the whole time. Okay, that's looking pretty good now. And a good way of checking as well is using the evaluate and the zebra stripes, because if these are pretty smooth and consistent and there are no distortions or sharp changes in direction, we know we're doing a pretty good job with the surfaces. So on this surface, we've got pretty good surface quality in general. Okay, now as a final step, we're going to come in and knit this. Gap control, there are actually no gaps. Done a pretty good job this time. And we want to create a solid out of that. And there we go, there we have it. We have our button as a separate body to that part. Still have some surface bodies actually that we're probably not going to use, so I can just go ahead and hold shift, select both of them, and just hit delete and delete those bodies. Then again, go ahead and fill it with a 0.3 fillet or something, just to add a little bit of definition between those parts there. And you might want to add a fillet on top there. And that is what we have. For those of you looking to push a little bit further, I'm not going to go any deeper today, but if you wanted to shape this even more and you couldn't really achieve it with a surface sweep, I'd start to look at surface boundary in a little bit more depth. This can be great, and the only reason I didn't go use surface boundary today is because we would have needed to have created more sketch geometry, because when you're creating a boundary, ideally you want 4 sides, not 2 otherwise, or 3, or it tends to create pinch points. But yeah, go and have a play, explore with the surface tools, and that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed, and another one coming soon.
What can I